Hey everyone, it's Jeannie and I'm back today to share a card with you using some Ink on 3 products. I'm using the Here For You stamp set. This is one of the 3 floral stamp set that Ink on 3 had released recently. I'll be stamping it on a piece of A2 cardstock, which I end up fussy cutting anyway using Ink on 3's Blackout ink. So I went ahead and stamped it, and sometimes you don't get the greatest first impression, especially with a new stamp, so I'm just going to go ahead and stamp it again. This ink is really dark and works well for watercolors and Copics, but today I will be doing some Copic coloring. I was a bit intimidated by how many little nooks and crannies this flower has, so it took me a bit to actually stamp out this particular floral set. So I'm also wiping off all the ink and using the Ink on 3's Ink Off Cleaner, which is an awesome cleaner. It's in a stamp pad, so it works like an ink pad, but it's convenient and compact. If you guys haven't tried it, you definitely should because it is one of my favorites and it cleans it really well. This ink normally does stain your stamps a little bit, but this cleans it pretty nicely and I really like it. Let's move on to the coloring. I started out with this floral and I wasn't really sure how I wanted to color it because sometimes coloring it with a ton of colors is kind of intimidating. So I decided to go for a monotone look for this flower. So we're going to be working in these cool grays. For my Copic coloring, I will be using C1, C3, C5, and C7. So C7 is the darkest color that I will be using for this floral, and I will be placing it in all the shadow areas for the leaves. For the floral itself, I decided that my darkest color will be a C5. And so everything looks really dark here, but once you put it up against some color or a background with color, it will definitely tone down a bit. But for sure, whenever I pull out my C7 for shadows, it's kind of scary. And this is probably why it is scary, because it looks like you're coloring a flower black. I will be going through the entire coloring of this floral, and I know that I haven't been on YouTube in a while. I've just kind of been in a slump and kind of lethargic, and so I just haven't felt up for making videos. And I've been making cards, I just haven't been filming them, and I've actually gone back to just creating cards to create for fun versus on design teams or any obligations, and that really has kind of put me back into my creative spark. So anytime that you feel overwhelmed with your creativity, I think it's best just to step away and then come back, and you'll be able to figure it out. Pull out the stamp sets that you had purchased with an idea and create it for you. You don't have to create for any other reason than for your own happiness and just letting it be a creative outlet for yourself. For the main floral area, I went in reverse. So normally I go in with my darkest color and then work out to my lightest, but here I am going in with my lightest color just to mark off where all the little shadows will be. So florals are a little bit more intimidating to color because there's so many different folds and areas of shadow, and this floral is actually quite helpful because it does have these little dots where some of the shadows should be, and that's quite helpful. So a lot of the time for this coloring of the flower, I just took my Copic markers and added color exactly in the little dotted areas. Anytime that you want a shadow, you'll just be adding the darker color. I think that this floral, even though it looks super intimidating because there's so many different layers, is actually quite easy to color. And I don't know why it took me so long to do. Maybe because I was in a creative slump, I just don't know. But it's actually not so hard to color. I think that going in with your lightest color first to mark off where all the shadows are is quite helpful, because then you can go in with your darker colors and really build up that color. It's not 100% perfect. I don't practice my shadows. I don't like map it out really in other than in my head, and I think that even if you make a mistake and you put a shadow where it's not supposed to be, it's fine. Like in the big picture of the floral, you probably won't even notice it. So there are some areas where it was a bit questionable and I wasn't sure how it would turn out, but it worked out. So when you go in with your darkest color, which is my C5, I am a little bit more light-handed with it because you really just want the darkest color in the smallest area. So you can be super generous with your C1 and C3 because that will blend out. But your C5 is the darkest color, and that's the color that you'll see a lot of because it's so predominant since it's dark. And so when I go in with my C5, I'm being very gentle with my Copic brush, and I am only marking a small area of it just to enhance the shadow area of where the grays are that you already had laid down. So as you can see, this is looking more and more dimensional just by adding a little bit of that color. And so when I go through the entire floral, I'm very careful not to put too much of that C5. Of course, if you do end up being a bit heavy-handed, you can go back in with your lighter colors like the C3 and the C1, kind of just to blend it out so it doesn't look so harsh. But for this particular floral, I kind of liked how harsh it looked with the dark shadows, so it really adds to the dimension, and I really ended up enjoying how this turned out. I wasn't really sure because when you play with colors, it's a little bit harder because you really see that and it looks more realistic as you color. But with grays, you're kind of stuck with the monotone, and it's a little bit different because once you put color behind the floral, it kind of tones it down and makes it look almost white. So for this floral, I did actually leave a bit of area where it was just completely white, and that makes it look even whiter, if that makes sense. So just remember what this looks like. It looks pretty dark, but later it'll look a lot lighter when we pop it up against a colorful background. For my colorful background today, I decided that I would pull out some watercolors, and I have this little palette from Michael's. It was super cheap. I think it was a couple bucks, and I put the Atelier Re-Inkers into the palette. So I have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. I took a piece of watercolor paper and I taped it onto a hardboard. I went with a clean brush with water and kind of wet the area where I wanted the watercolors to be. Then I just went in and dropped in color. So into a circle. I didn't really have a plan for this, and I just hoped for the best. I'm trying to play with watercolors a little bit more because the more you play with a particular medium, the more comfortable you get. And watercolors always make me uncomfortable. I've mentioned it many times before, and I think that you just really have to play with it. To be completely honest, I had another panel that I created and I didn't love how it ended up. So I kind of learned from the mistake of that where I just played with it too much and I kept adding color and it just became too muddy because everything mixed together. And it's also handy to have a paper towel on hand to mop up any of the extra wet areas. So you can see there's a little puddle developing around the purple and the blue, and I just keep going in with a paper towel just to pick up that extra water. With watercolors, I've realized you just don't need that much water, and I think that you probably need way less than what you actually think you do need. So I am just going to go in to enhance some of the colors in the lighter areas. So with the green and the blue, and just dropping in additional color just to kind of make it look a little bit stronger. And once I was happy with it, I kind of left it alone because my first panel, I just messed with it too much and I really didn't love how it turned out because the colors just started mixing together more and more and became more muddy. I am happy with how it turned out, and I actually used a heat gun to kind of speed up the drying because I just was impatient. I cut down the panel to a little smaller than an A2 card, so I believe I cut it down to 4 inches by 5 1/4. And for the sentiment, I am pulling out the sentiments from the Here For You stamp set, and I'll be heat embossing them and stamping them onto a piece of black cardstock. Because it's kind of a monotone flower, I really wanted to go with the black cardstock, but I mean, if you look at my other cards, black cardstock with white heat embossing is definitely my go-to. It's just something I always use. Here I'm using Ink on 3's Juicy Ink, and I will be heat embossing with the Artic White embossing powder, which I think works really well. It is for fine details, and these sentiments are a little bit smaller, so you definitely want a powder that will get in all the little crevices to really be able to see it when you heat emboss it. So I'm going to apply my heat gun, and then I'll be trimming down those strips to small sentiment strips. I also decided to pop up my watercolor panel on a piece of foam, and mainly because it did warp as I heat set it, and I wanted it to kind of lay down flat, so I added the foam tape. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the floral in the middle of the watercolor panel and then add my 2 sentiments at the top and bottom, and I thought that this turned out really well. I had actually walked away from this panel for a little bit and I thought it was kind of plain. I kind of regretted not adding gold splatter on the background before I added everything, but I couldn't do that now unless I wanted to mask the sentiments and the florals. So I pulled out some Trinity Stamps gold baubles, and this just added the gold accents that I thought I needed for this card. I mean, you definitely could have left it plain, but I thought the gold just kind of really made the entire card and just added that extra something to it. And I've been a little bit more liberal with my embellishments these days. But yeah, that's it for this card, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's a really fun technique just to have a pop of color behind a monotone image, and it just looks really bright and pretty. So I hope you enjoyed this card, and I will see you guys next time with another video. Bye!